Think forward. Think Research Channel.
Hello and welcome to the show. Tonight I'm here with Melissa Harrison, a USC alumni. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So now I understand that your family was actually personally affected by the tragedy. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, actually I was born and raised in New Orleans. I lived there for 18 years. I moved away to come to college at USC. And so we lived in Kenner, but my entire extended family lives in and around New Orleans, basically. So my family's house got a little bit of flooding. A couple of my aunt's houses were actually flooded to the roof or had several feet worth. So it was sort of a family-wide catastrophe.
Wow.
They all evacuated.
You were actually not in New Orleans when it happened?
No.
How did you hear about it?
Well, I think I was watching it. My family was calling on sort of a regular basis. That's a good thing about the hurricanes, is that you get to watch them kind of come in. You're aware that it's coming. You can kind of brace yourself, although nobody braced themselves enough for this one, obviously. But so I was getting cell phone calls from them, and they were saying, you know, we're getting ready to evacuate. We're leaving now. We're still in traffic. It's 5 hours later. We're still in traffic. And then they went to Baton Rouge, my immediate family, and other members of my family sort of scattered. It was kind of just everybody scattered to the winds and hooked up later. Sure.
Around about when did they get the call or to evacuate, and when did they actually leave the house? And what did they take everything? Did they pack?
Well, I think the voluntary evacuations started coming in like within 3 days, I think 4 days ahead of time, and then the mandatory evacuations were coming within, I think, 2 days. Okay. They left, let's see, it hit on Monday, and I think my family left on Saturday night to try to get away from the traffic. They were leaving late at night. But my family is one that always leaves. My mom's a really nervous person. She's always got her hurricane stuff packed. She's got the batteries and the canned food and the water, and everything was set, which is good, because we always make fun of her, but this time it really worked out. She was ready with all the photo albums, which was something that I was really worried about when I couldn't get through to them. They took both the cars, so neither of them got flooded in the engine or, you know, had the mold in the car or anything. Both my pets, my dog and my cat, they were set. They had cages for them, food and water, so we were definitely on the high tier of the preparedness.
You guys
scale.
Were amazing. That's very impressive. And everything got packed, like the morning came in Saturday morning, and so you just slowly packed all of the possessions that you needed? Yeah,
I think my mom sort of whipped my brother and dad into shape. They were probably sitting around playing video games, and she was kind of corralling the crew to get the food together and stuff, but they had a plan. And I think that gave me peace of mind, because I knew, being the person that she is, that my mom was going to make sure that my family got taken care of. And so when I couldn't get through to them, because for days I couldn't get through to their cell phones, they couldn't get through to me. I called literally everyone on my cell phone list. I'd just go down the list and try them, and it would just, you know, they were all busy, or they'd say due to the natural disaster, you know, there's no contact with this phone. And but I knew that they were going to be fine, because I knew that how my family was going to be prepared. So. Sure.
How much you said that you were talking to them while they were evacuating, so when they were on the road. When did you lose contact with them, and how long into, when the hurricane actually hit? Or
yeah, pretty much the day of, that was the end of everything. I heard from them that they had reached Baton Rouge, which was like, you know, a day before, and that they were, you know, staying in their hotel and just just waiting it out and expecting to be back in a couple of days. You know, my brother's enjoying it as like a little break from school, and my dad's got some time off of work, and they're all happy.
Okay.
Because nobody thinks, you know, nobody expected that it was going to be as bad as it was. And then, yeah, the day that it hit, and from that point forward, I think 5 days passed before I actually had any contact from any of my family at all. So
right.
That was kind of scary.
Sure, it must have been really difficult.
Yeah.
With Baton Rouge was unaffected, or was it
unaffected by the storm itself as far as like flooding?
Yeah.
Devastated by however many million, like a million people flooding into the city. I think they said that the population of Baton Rouge doubled overnight.
Wow.
So that became a big problem, actually. That was one of my biggest difficulties in dealing with it, was when my parents called and they said, "We need you to find us a place to live." And like, that's not a call I think any kid wants to get.
Okay.
Is please find us a hotel or some place to stay, because we have, you know, they were going to stay with family, and then they got out of the hotel because they only had a few days, and Red Cross was coming in. A lot of Red Cross people took the hotel rooms, which was kind of odd.
Yeah.
And unfortunate. And so then I was kind of taxed with calling every apartment and every, you know, home for rent and every hotel in Baton Rouge and trying to find a place for my parents to stay.
Okay. And how difficult was that? I mean, were
Impossible.
there work? Did you
nothing.
end up finding a place?
Nothing, not a single thing. I called for 2 days straight. From the time I woke up, just got on the internet, started looking up listings, calling everything that I found, and it was either that I couldn't get through,
yeah, or
no, we're booked for the entire rest of the next 2 months with Red Cross workers.
Right.
There was a lot of that. Or no, we're just, no, I was going to rent the house, but I sold it for 5 times what I should have because people are desperate for houses, that sort of thing.
How did your family end up finding housing, and where did they stay?
They crammed in with a distant relative who lived in Baton Rouge. I think it was them and 5 other families living in her guest room.
Okay.
With the cats and the dogs and the little kids and craziness. But they made do. I mean, I think family really pulled through for a lot of people. It's a different situation there, I guess. Even blood is thicker than water, and if you haven't spoken to your relatives in years, that's okay. You know, come crash with us, and we'll take care of you until.
Well, that's really fortunate. I was very surprised that you mentioned that the Red Cross had booked such a large number of places. Did they seem to be giving preference to Red Cross members, or was it just that they got in earlier?
I guess they just got in earlier. It was really disheartening for me to hear. Like, it sort of upset me. I support what the Red Cross does, and I'm actually going to New Orleans this Friday to go do some volunteer stuff for a couple of weeks. And I think that they're a great organization, but at the same time, it was really frustrating to me to find that I couldn't find some place for my parents to stay because the Red Cross was staying there, but they have shelters, so why can't they stay in their shelters? That's what I don't understand is, you know, if you're a Red Cross worker, couldn't you just stay in the shelter that you set up to, you know, for all the other people? So that was kind of strange.
You mentioned that you were doing some volunteer work. What do they have you doing now, like after the disaster?
It's a lot of people are still in shelters and stuff, or a lot of people are trying to get a handle on like dealing with their insurance situations and things. So it's really family case working. You sort of give people the paperwork for FEMA, you know, like get them on track for that, get them on track for any sort of, because Red Cross gives certain amounts of money for certain things that families can say that they've lost, and they really are pretty trustworthy. You know, if you say you lost your fridge, then okay, you lost your fridge, and here's, you know, $200, go buy like a cooler for a while or something. So just that sort of like immediate needs kind of help, and then helping people get in touch with their insurance companies and try to figure out all the paperwork, because that's like the next big hurdle is to, you know, the mountains of paperwork and you know, getting in touch with everybody who's going to help you recover from it.
Okay. You've been to New Orleans since the disaster, or? No,
I haven't. I'm going back on Friday, Friday, the 7th.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with it, Melissa.
Thank you.
When we get back, we'll be talking to a professor from the Department of Environmental Studies, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. If you have any comments or questions about the show, feel free to get in touch with us. You can email us on cu@trojanvision.com, or you can give us a call on 213-740-2741. Tonight we're here with Professor Anthony Michaels. Professor, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thank you very much.
Now, I understand that you're an expert on this kind of weather phenomenon. You had some experience with it beforehand.
I have some experience with hurricanes. Mostly it was a sidelight earlier on in my career where I worked with the insurance industry on how to predict the numbers of hurricanes that'll hit and the damages that'll come from them.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about Hurricane Katrina?
Well, Hurricane Katrina was sort of a classic midsummer kind of storm at the peak of the season. And because the Gulf is so warm, and this is an anomalously warm year in the Gulf, when it cruised across the Gulf, that extra heat caused it to strengthen up to a Category 5. And then as they come close to shore, they always tend to weaken a bit, and this one did weaken a little bit right at the time of landfall, and it made a little kick to the right, and so that kind of made it actually miss a direct hit on New Orleans. But it's very much a classic pattern for the peak season kind of storm.
So how frequent are these storms typically in the region?
Well, we've got to T before. Generally speaking, you have about a dozen, 12 to 14 storms in a year in the Atlantic,
right.
And the number varies a lot. So in El Nino years, you'll have 3 or 4 total. In La Nina years or odd years like this, you might have 20. I think 22 is the most we've ever had in the Atlantic in a single year.
Okay. And what is a Category 5 storm?
Well, it's all based on wind speed. So you get above about 145 knots and you're a Category 5 storm. And it's the peak wind speed. You've got this big rotating storm, and as you get closer to the center, just like a skater, when they're doing a twirl, pulling their arms in and the speed's up, you have the fastest speeds right there around the eye. And so they measure the sustained speed and the gusts right there at the eye, and as you go through each threshold of speed, maximum speed around the eye, you just call them bigger and bigger storms.
Okay, and a Category 5?
It's the biggest there is.
The biggest there is.
Yeah. The Rita actually hit 175 miles an hour, which is right up there at the upper limit of what a hurricane in the Atlantic can do. Typhoons in the Pacific can get stronger. They tend to be, the Pacific's so big and there's so much heat there that they can actually grow to be much larger in size. But for the Atlantic, Rita actually got to the limit. This one almost got to about the limit of their strength.
All right. And what is the difference between a hurricane and a typhoon?
Nothing.
Nothing. Same, just different words. Okay, that's what I thought. All right. And in terms of predicting these hurricanes, how much advance notice was there about the size of Katrina?
Well, the size, what happens is you got one of these storms going and it kind of takes on a life of its own. It starts moving across the ocean, and then it gets steered by the prevailing winds, where the upper level lows and highs are, the kinds of things that we see when storm fronts come past us. Those kind of tweak these storms and make them go left and right. Most storms come in from the east to west, turn to the north, and then spin out from west to east at the mid-latitudes, 30 degrees. So it's a classic in, up, and out kind of pattern. And you kind of know what they're going to do, but there's now very sophisticated computer models that actually give you a lot of details of what they're going to do. And then where they go then determines how warm the water is they pass over, and the more warmth there is, the more heat they can suck out of the ocean, the stronger they get. Oddly enough, if they go slow, though, they suck enough heat out of the ocean that they cool it off, and they can actually kill themselves, turn their energy off because they cool the water underneath them, and it becomes a self-limiting thing. So there's kind of a speed at which they get steered over ever warmer water that sort of keeps their strength really high, too fast or too slow, and the intensity changes. We have a weird situation now with hurricanes that the best models actually predict exactly where they're going to go, but you're still not quite sure it's right. So what you see, that band of color on the TV when they're predicting it, is actually detuned by psychology, because you don't want to cry wolf and have too many times that you evacuate people for nothing.
Right.
But at the same time, you never want to make the mistake of failing to evacuate an area because the storm makes a twist. So right now it's almost a psychological thing to pick the width of uncertainty that sort of lets many people be safe, and at the same time, have not that many people have cried wolf and have evacuated for nothing.
But we are relatively better at predicting.
Oh, we're great. 48 hours, you know almost exactly where it's going to be.
Okay.
And if you know when you look at the tracks, there's all these different tracks there. If you know which ones are which, you can actually guess which one's the right one. There's a couple of models that are better than the others, and if you look at it,
a better guess what can happen. Okay. Now you mentioned that I actually didn't know that Katrina missed a direct hit.
Right. It kicked over right at the last second, and it actually didn't pass directly over New Orleans. And so New Orleans never experienced higher than Category 3 winds.
Right.
But what happened is the storm surge that runs at the front edge, the hurricane's sort of sweeping around like this, it pushes up the water on the eastern side of the storm.
Okay.
And because of where Katrina is with respect to New Orleans, it pushed a lot of water up the river and into Lake Pontchartrain, and the combination of the high water and the wind-whipped water undermined those levees. So the wind damage actually was only a Category
Sure.
3. I mean, yeah, it's still an insane hurricane,
Right.
but it wasn't as intense as the central core, which was Category 4 and actually did some substantial damage in New Orleans and Mississippi, or in Louisiana and Mississippi to the east of New Orleans. But the real surprise was the next day when the levees failed, and all of a sudden that water comes in.
We talk a lot about the levees failing. I mean, exactly, were they destroyed by the force of the flooding, or was
no,
it
they
just
were weakened, and it turns out there'll be a lot of recriminations on this, because this has been predicted ever since New Orleans went below sea level, and the whole city's been slowly settling over time, as deltas always do, and it's just been obvious that this could someday happen, and there were actually improvements made to the levees over the years to try and strengthen them against this kind of thing, and they were supposedly strengthened with respect to a Category 3. But there's just things you don't understand. The levees had settled more than they thought. They were probably weakened, and these concrete structures they put on top in hindsight will probably turn out not to have been a good idea, and the combination of forces they were exposed to just created a break. Once you create a break, it's a levee. They just wash away. And so the first weakening breaks through, and then that water's just eroding the whole thing away, and soon you've got these enormous breaks in them.
Okay. What would have happened if Hurricane Katrina had made a direct hit on New Orleans? I mean, I know you can't say with certainty, but if you were to predict?
What would have happened is there would have been more houses wrecked by the wind, and then the floods covered them with water.
So they would still have certainly happened?
Oh, I think, yes. The way it hit, if anything, if it had come closer, the levees would have failed that night. And so in some ways, the levees failing the next day, there was sort of a little bit of a reprieve, and that initial damage is happening after the intensity of the storm is gone, instead of having to do the emergency response to flooding right in the middle of the throes of the hurricane. But I think it would have happened either way. Yeah.
In your opinion, is the greatest threat of a hurricane the flooding and the wind-whipped water that you were talking about, or the winds itself?
No, New Orleans is very unique that way. You always have a storm surge issue right on the coast, but most of the time the storm surge damage is very limited to the coast, and the wind damage is what extends inland. And so the biggest worry from a finance standpoint about most hurricanes is the high wind damage on a major city, and then the subsequent damage. Very few things are designed to stand a 100-mile-an-hour tree moving against the building, and so
Sure.
so you have substantial damage. This is just a unique situation where you've got a city below sea level that's
That was
protected by
affected.
these levees, and it's always been the three big disasters that they predicted would happen: terrorist event in New York, hurricane hit on New Orleans covered by flooding, and earthquake in San Francisco. And San Francisco is better watch out.
When we get back, we're going to be talking some more about prevention and the other things that we can do to help manage these problems, and we'll bring back Melissa. So we'll be right back. So now we have with us Melissa and Professor Anthony Michaels to just talk about how we're dealing with the particular problem. So how would you two individually evaluate the government's response to the disaster and how we dealt with both prevention and the after effects?
I think my folks are going to get maybe a total of like $1,500 from FEMA and like the federal aid and stuff. And to put that on a spectrum, the guys at Trojan Vision, because I used to work here, set up a fundraiser and raised over $2,000 for my family, and that's college students. Where are my tax dollars? We've paid so much, and I feel like they're getting hardly anything back. But then again, we weren't the worst, so can't be greedy.
How much actually would you say you were affected in financial terms?
I with the roof that we'll have to repair, and probably a good deal of the roof will have to get redone, I'd say 5, 6, 7,000 maybe even.
Okay, so definitely inadequate.
Yeah.
Even for someone.
Even
that
for people who weren't really damaged that much.
Sure. Professor?
Well, the response was completely inadequate. They blew it big time. And it's odd because they had gotten pretty good at hurricanes. Hurricane Andrew was the last worst case scenario for just not being ready, not expecting something of this scale, and they said, let's get better at this. And all through the 90s, FEMA got better and better at this kind of response. And certainly this was dramatically bigger than what they had nominally prepared for, but last year they did a Hurricane Pam simulation, which was this exact storm. And they ran all the emergency response stuff, they did everything else that they thought they would have to do, and yet when the time came, they were inadequately prepared. And I think a lot of it is that the whole shift of FEMA into Homeland Security has created a situation where their eye is on a different target. And it's a good target too, but the reality is you prepare completely differently for a terrorist attack than you do for a hurricane. And what they just let the whole preparation system fall apart.
Okay. What about prevention in terms of, I mean, you mentioned that they did take some actions to strengthen the levees and that sort of thing. Could they have done more? Is there anything they could have done better?
Well, you'll second guess till the cows come home, but certainly they could have done more on the levees, and that is, for this particular instance, the big thing. But there's a lot of stuff that people can do. A lot of the damage from storms comes from, and you had said earlier that your folks put on storm shutters. Once you pop a hole in a building and the wind is going into a hole on the inside, it just blows the whole building apart. And there's a lot of very simple things with respect to the right quality of roofing, the right quality of window covers, things you can do to sort of keep the integrity of the building set in the face of that wind, that then makes you have very, very modest damage. If you don't do those things, then you're open, if the storm hits you, you're open to much greater devastation. And obviously the preparation things.
Yeah, that's one thing that certainly Melissa's family could teach all of us in terms of preparing to be maybe a little paranoid in certain situations.
Yeah.
It can't hurt.
Yeah. Works out in the end.
Did you learn it from your mom? Do you have an earthquake kit?
I always made fun of her. I'm going to get one now. I was one of the ones who kind of poked fun at my mom for being too prepared, but I will never, ever again make fun of her for being prepared.
I went out to Home Depot the next day, and we have one, but hadn't looked at it in quite a while, and repurchased all the things and got it set again.
So with FEMA's criticisms, it's potential that it's not even just against hurricanes that we might be underprepared for?
Yeah. Because
you mentioned any natural disasters.
The scale of underpreparedness was so striking. I mean, the classic things that they were supposed to have fixed, like the radios being on the same frequencies. The exact specific things that came out of 9/11 that were going to be the hallmark of the new way of dealing with these things. They blew them all. And so the level of, and the states and local agencies are ill-equipped to handle this. So that's why FEMA exists. FEMA just has failed in its job to actually put the preparations in place to pre-deploy the people to respond. The reality was Red Cross was filling up those hotel rooms.
Yeah.
Where were the FEMA people?
So are there any other government agencies or departments or organizations that carry some of the blame, or would you guys say that it's FEMA pretty much over and above? I mean, I know we're pointing fingers.
Go around. I worry that this finger pointing and this politicking is going to overshadow the needs of especially the people who are hit the worst, the people who are still living in shelters, the people who have literally nothing their money they kept in their mattress is gone, and it's going to become all about Republicans versus Democrats, state versus federal. There is surely enough blame for everyone. Each individual, I'm sure I can shoulder some blame. That's not the point. The point is how do we fix it, not whose fault.
She's exactly right. This is something where you deal with this situation now. It's the one we got, and right now the job is to make those people whole, get them into homes, get them into jobs, get some semblance of order back and some process for rebuilding, give people hope. But you got to learn from this and use the things we learned from to make sure that the next time we don't do it so bad.
So how do we fix it? What do we do next?
I think you got to, right now, fixing it for the people.
Yeah.
I think you're starting to see now a massive mobilization of the kinds of things that we can do well. You're starting to bring in temporary housing. You're starting to fix some of these dislocation kinds of problems. They're starting to actually slowly repair things on the edges so that you can actually start getting people to live there, so there's somebody there to actually fix things. Who do you go to cut the trees down in your yard when all the tree trimmers are in Baton Rouge? And
my parents have been there for about a week and a half now, and they said the garbage has still not been picked up. Everybody, the streets smell rancid because just old refrigerators and carpets and things are still out there. No garbage men are back.
But it's a steady process. Once you get away from the instantaneous needs of people to stay alive, then it's a steady process to then try and slowly mobilize the forces it takes to house people, to feed people, to bring back some of the social structures that it takes to then slowly rebuild. There's going to be some big questions, though, for the parts of New Orleans that were inundated for a long period of time, because those houses are unlivable, the mold issues and everything else. And you have to think exactly how you do that rebuilding so that you end up building a quality community as a result of this. And I think be fair to the people that lived there before. There's always a tendency in these things to rip the whole thing out and replace it with tract homes for completely different people than originally there, and that won't be New Orleans. It won't be fair to the people that ultimately bore the burden.
Some of the things that I've heard talk about some of the big cities that have been affected, particularly New Orleans, kind of never returning to normal or never getting back to what made especially an iconic city like New Orleans so fantastic. What do you guys think?
It'll be back.
Oh yeah.
As long as everyone is trying to come back. I don't know, those reports on the news about like people are just going to relocate to New Mexico. That's not the hardcore New Orleanians.
Yeah.
Everybody's coming back.
Yeah.
You'll miss the food, you'll miss the jazz. Everybody's going to come back in as soon as they can, I think.
I agree. And what actually happens is the cities come back better, because what you have here is 100 to 200-year-old infrastructure, and all the little slow perturbations on that as people fix things and fix things. And then when these things happen, you rebuild, and you rebuild a very new infrastructure. Takes care of all these historic problems for how cities are built. They end up being better at the end.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that, guys.
Yeah.
And that's it from us. Thank you for watching. See you at USC, and we'll see you later. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
That was great. I'm glad we